It was a quiet dawn in Mangalore, India. The runway, nestled on top of a tabletop plateau, stood like a sliver of asphalt between two deadly gorges. It wasn't forgiving. It wasn't meant for mistakes. And on May 22, 2010, Flight 812 from Dubai, operated by Air India Express, approached that precarious landing strip with 166 souls on board, many of them returning home after months of working abroad, their luggage filled with gifts, dreams, and hope. But in less than 5 minutes, everything unraveled. The Boeing 737-800 that carried them would overrun the runway, plunge down the hillside, and explode into a fireball of twisted metal. It became one of the worst aviation disasters in Indian history. But what if the real cause wasn't just human error? What if what investigators found inside the wreckage didn't just point to one sleepy pilot, but to a flaw so deep it shattered Boeing's reputation? Let's uncover what really happened aboard Air India Express Flight 812. Flight 812 wasn't supposed to be a challenge. A standard red-eye, it departed Dubai just before midnight, manned by a crew who had done this route dozens of times. But right from the start, there were red flags. The commander, Captain Zlatko Glusica, was a seasoned pilot, but he was also profoundly sleep-deprived. Cockpit voice recordings later revealed long stretches of silence during descent, minutes where he said nothing, likely because he had dozed off. That silence cost precious time, and as the aircraft neared Mangalore, it was already high and fast, too fast for a safe landing. The co-pilot, a younger Indian officer, repeatedly suggested a go-around. Too high, he warned, too steep. But Glusica dismissed the warnings. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fatigue, but the descent continued. And here's where the technical puzzle begins. Because the aircraft's systems, like the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, EGPWS, should have screamed, and they did. But what Glusica did next would horrify investigators. As the aircraft descended rapidly toward runway 24, the EGPWS issued multiple alerts. Sink rate, pull up. These are not suggestions. They're urgent, life-saving commands. But Captain Glusica, inexplicably, disabled the warning and pressed on. Even Boeing's automated systems were begging him to stop. The plane was configured improperly, approaching with excessive speed, the flaps weren't fully deployed, and the landing gear was strained. The co-pilot tried one last time. "Go around?" he asked. Glusica remained silent. What's most disturbing is what the flight data recorder later revealed. At 200 feet above ground, the aircraft was still traveling over 160 knots, far too fast for Mangalore's short runway. And yet, no go-around was initiated. This moment, this exact decision, sealed the fate of the flight. And Boeing's role? Investigators later asked, why wasn't the system able to override a clearly unsafe approach? Why was the pilot still in full control after ignoring every critical alert? The plane touched down, but not at the beginning of the runway. It landed over 2,000 feet beyond the threshold, leaving barely 800 feet of stopping distance. The spoilers, designed to slow the plane, weren't deployed. The thrust reversers, essential for braking, were activated late. And to make matters worse, the runway was damp, offering less friction. Within seconds, the aircraft overshot the edge, broke through the boundary wall, and plunged into the gorge. The nose shattered. Fuel tanks ruptured. A fireball engulfed the wreckage. Out of 166 people on board, only 8 survived. But when rescue crews and investigators reached the wreckage, what they found stunned them. Not just charred debris, but critical cockpit systems oddly intact. The flight computer, the EGPWS unit, and the CVR all survived, revealing a trail of ignored alarms and overrides that raised one alarming question. Shouldn't the aircraft have stopped the pilot from making such fatal choices? Boeing's aircraft are celebrated for giving pilots manual control, even when things go wrong. But in this case, that philosophy backfired. Unlike Airbus, which enforces flight envelope protection that can physically block unsafe maneuvers, Boeing's 737 design still allows experienced pilots to fly through warnings, even to their doom. In the case of Flight 812, Boeing's system architecture became part of the problem. The alarms did work. The alerts were loud, but none of them could stop a fatigued, disoriented captain from making the wrong call. The system trusted the human more than it trusted itself. This exposed a terrifying flaw. When automation depends on human compliance, but the human is impaired, catastrophe becomes inevitable. Aviation experts called this the perfect storm, a textbook tragedy where training, fatigue, cockpit dynamics, and system design all failed simultaneously. And in the aftermath, fingers weren't just pointed at Air India, they were pointed at Boeing. Because what scientists uncovered in those black boxes wasn't just human error, it was a systemic vulnerability. What unfolded inside that cockpit was more than a series of technical failures. It was a breakdown of communication, hierarchy, and trust. Investigators dove into the cockpit voice recorder and discovered a chilling psychological dynamic. Captain Glusica, though experienced, was not just tired, he was unresponsive. For over 90 seconds during the descent, he was completely silent, showing signs of microsleep, a state in which the brain shuts down momentarily due to sleep deprivation. Meanwhile, the co-pilot, 39-year-old H.S. Ahluwalia, identified the danger early. He issued multiple warnings, but he never asserted full authority to take over. Why? Experts pointed to a cultural and professional deference, a junior officer reluctant to challenge a senior captain. It's a pattern known in aviation as authority gradient, and it's cost lives in the past. The data was clear. Ahluwalia had the awareness to save the flight, but the cockpit dynamic muted his voice. It wasn't just a Boeing failure. It was a failure of CRM, crew resource management, a foundational principle in modern aviation. And it proved that the best systems in the world still depend on the human will to act. Amid the scorched fuselage, surrounded by chaos, were three technological survivors: the cockpit voice recorder, the flight data recorder, and, remarkably, the enhanced ground proximity warning system module. These devices were found intact enough to extract data, and what they revealed shocked even seasoned investigators. Every system had been functioning perfectly. Warnings were triggered on cue. The gear was deployed correctly. The flaps, though late, were registered. The EGPWS had given its alerts. But none of it mattered, because what became clear was that there was no failure of the aircraft, only of its pilot's choices. This led investigators to a difficult truth. The systems didn't fail. The human-machine interface did. There was no automated correction, no lockdown override, no last-minute control block that could force a go-around. It laid bare the philosophical chasm between Boeing's trust in pilot autonomy and Airbus's flight envelope protections. And now, for the first time, Boeing's core design principles were under scrutiny, not because they broke, but because they worked as intended and still let a plane crash. The aftermath of the crash sent shockwaves through the global aviation community. India's DGCA immediately overhauled its crew rest protocols, mandating stricter duty hour limits and new guidelines for red-eye flights. Airlines began retraining pilots on assertiveness in the cockpit, especially for junior officers. But the real pressure mounted on Boeing. Air safety panels across the world began asking, should Boeing adapt to a new era of digital safeguards, even if it means limiting human control? Airbus had long implemented protections that wouldn't have allowed Flight 812 to land under those conditions. Their software would have rejected the approach. Boeing resisted that shift, until now. Media reports surfaced suggesting that Boeing was internally re-evaluating its policy on manual overrides. And while the company didn't publicly admit fault, insiders claimed that updates to future 737 systems were quietly accelerated, focusing on integrating AI-driven decision support tools, silent co-pilots that could someday override a bad call before it turns fatal. And here lies the most uncomfortable question of all. Yes, Captain Glusica made critical errors. Yes, Air India's oversight was lacking. But when the entire system is built on the assumption that every human will perform perfectly, even at 5 a.m. after 20 hours of wakefulness, who is really to blame? Is it fair to point fingers at a single fatigued pilot? Or should we look deeper, at a design philosophy that empowers pilots but leaves no fail-safe when that human fails? Should Boeing have seen this coming after other overrun incidents in similar aircraft? Or were they simply upholding a principle that humans must remain in charge, even when they're not at their best? In the wreckage of Flight 812, investigators didn't find a faulty engine or broken wiring. They found a philosophical flaw, one that questions how much control we should give a human and how much we should entrust to the machine. And for Boeing, this wasn't just a crash, it was a reckoning. Air India Express Flight 812 wasn't just another aviation disaster. It was a slow-motion tragedy, built over hours of pilot fatigue, seconds of hesitation, and a deadly silence from a cockpit that should have been screaming with action. But what scientists and investigators found inside the wreckage didn't just blame a man. It revealed something far more unsettling, a system that trusted him too much. The Boeing 737-800 functioned as it was designed to. It warned, it calculated, it alerted, but it never intervened. Because Boeing's design didn't fail technically, it failed ethically. It put ultimate trust in a pilot who was asleep at the wheel, literally, and left no option for the aircraft to save itself. In an age where autopilot can land planes, AI can monitor fatigue, and data can predict danger before it strikes, this crash raised a burning question. Should we still be trusting human judgment more than machine logic, especially when lives are on the line? Flight 812 didn't crash because something broke. It crashed because everything worked, but no one had the authority or the programming to say enough. And for Boeing, that single flaw may have destroyed more than a plane. It destroyed the illusion of control. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden battle between human instinct and machine design, then hit that like button and share this video with someone who still thinks automation is the enemy. Drop a comment. Should pilots always have the final say, or is it time we let the system speak louder? And if you want to uncover more stories that powerful companies would rather keep quiet, subscribe now. Because here we don't just report the news, we expose the truth they bury in black boxes.